This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have best-selling and award-winning author Vaseem Khan here to talk about his new release, The Girl in Cell A. Welcome, Vaseem.
Oh, thank you for inviting me on, Marie. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to. I think you'll be my first American interviewer for an American book by a British author.
I can't wait to dig in, but before we do, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story's about?
So The Girl in Cell A is a psychological thriller. It's set in contemporary small-town America. The town is fictional, at least I made it up. It's called Eden Falls. It's a small mining town in the southern part of the United States, but not the deep south, and ruled for several generations by a mining dynasty called the Wycliffe family. And at the age of 17, the daughter of the housekeeper of the Wyclifes, a young woman named Oriana, is convicted of murdering the heir to the dynasty. Now, she claims she didn't do it. She claims she can't remember what happened on that fateful day, but she's convicted and she's sent away to prison. And the book proceeds in two narratives. So one narrative is with Oriana arriving in prison and being interviewed by a forensic therapist who is trying to crack open the black box of her memory. And the second narrative is told in alternating chapters, and that's Oriana completing her 18-year sentence and coming back to Eden Falls as a woman in her mid-30s who is trying to unravel the secrets around what happened that particular day. And so it's a psychological thriller, meets unreliable narrators, meets small-town secrets, meets big family saga.
Equals fantastic read. You gave us so much in that overview. This book is so very rich for so many reasons. Part of it is those two POVs that we're getting, one from Oriana and the other from her therapist. What made you decide to split it in that way?
Yeah, so both of them are told as first-person narratives. So one is, as you say, Annie Ledet, who is the forensic psychotherapist, and we have her take as she gradually interviews this young woman who starts at the age of 17 when she's first given into Annie's therapeutic care. And Annie is gradually trying to piece together the past by gradually breaking open Oriana's memory. In the other narrative, of course, we have Oriana herself telling her own story in her mid-30s now, having completed this sentence and coming back to Eden Falls, where she was born and grew up, and realizing that this entire community believes her to be a convicted murderer. Because the two narratives end up converging, it leads the reader in different directions. One, Oriana from the modern time going back and letting us look at Eden Falls, which hasn't changed a great deal in those 18 years. It's in stasis, partly because of the murder and the effects that it's had on the town, but also because it is a very small town and it's a kind of place which we love in fiction, which has that textural quality of mystery and secrets bubbling away below the surface.
Knowing about your background, the series you've written, where they've been set, where you've lived, why small town USA for this particular story?
Well, I mean, you're referencing the fact that, I was born and grew up in the UK. I lived for a decade in India. I've written two series of mystery novels set in India, one in contemporary India and one in the 1950s India. And I continue to write the series set in 1950s India. This was a labor of love, you could say, that began when I was a teenager. And I first fell in love with Americana, specifically small town American films. And I still remember watching films like In the Heat of the Night and To Kill a Mockingbird and Deliverance. And you probably might think that a young Brit of Asian heritage or Indian heritage in a corner of London in England, why would he be so interested in such fare? But a lot of the fiction that we consume, whether it's in books or on screen, is about escaping from our own environment and figuring out things and learning about new places. And for me, that idea of this small town in America, these closed communities, which are a microcosm of everything that's good and bad about human beings, disconnection or too much connection, everybody up in all each other's business, as you guys say in the States. And then this amazing cast of characters that recur in that kind of fiction, your autocrats, your mayors and your police chiefs, your failed high school quarterbacks and your prom queens. And I fell in love with all of that. And so for 30 plus years, I've been thinking, because that's how long I've been writing, 20 years of that was unsuccessful with rejected books. And then for the last 11 years, I've been published. But for 30 odd years, I've been thinking that I would write my big American novel. And it finally, all of these ideas coalesced in The Girl in Saleh.
It really is fertile ground, especially some of the movies that you referenced are some of the most poignant of their era because of the issues around race and privilege and some of the things America still grapples with to this day in very, very profound ways. And I loved knowing your background and seeing how thoroughly and how accurately you hit the nail on the head with those issues. And I was wondering, as much as there are cultural differences from country to country, did you feel with your experience in small towns, wherever it's been, that there is some overlap in human behavior and in those dynamics where people tend to know a little bit more? Maybe in certain places they don't get as involved or they're not as vocal, but some of those issues around judgment and interconnectedness, do you see that some of those themes do play across cultures?
Yeah, it's the odd situation in small towns is that although there are fewer people and therefore everybody seems to know everybody else, you can still be an outsider if you're not on the right side of the tracks, for instance. And Oriana very much firmly is not on the right side of the tracks. Now, this isn't a book where race is a central issue, but Oriana's heritage is from the Indian subcontinent. So, following the emancipation of slaves throughout the British Empire in the late or the mid 1800s, waves of these indentured laborers turned up in the West Indies from India to work on the sugar and cocoa plantations. And then from there, it was a short hop over to the United States. So that's where Oriana's people have hailed from. And because of that, there's always been this slight idea that she's an outsider. Also, in small towns, you often have lines drawn between those who have power and wealth and those who don't. And Oriana, she's the daughter of the housekeeper to the White Cloaks. So she clearly doesn't have any of this power. And I think I wanted to really play on that particular dynamic for the purposes not just of the book, but because it impacts upon who suspicion falls upon when this murder becomes not just news in this small town, where of course it explodes like a landmine, but it becomes an American obsession. The newspapers call her the girl in Saleh because the crime becomes a sensation. The family, the White Clerk family, is well known across the country. They're very reclusive, but they're incredibly wealthy and powerful. And because of that, the person who has notionally murdered the heir to that fortune is, of course, front page news.
By a jury. And she has spent a lot of time in prison for it. But beyond that judgment in her own community is this national awareness and this pressure that even if she leaves the small town, she's really never going to get away from that. And I thought it was so brilliant in a psychological thriller to hang this massive boulder over her head that really doesn't give her any ability to see the sun or to see the future in that way and keeps her looking backward.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, because she's flying blind, right? So from the outset, we know that her memory's got these. There's cloud cover over her memory, but at the same time, she can't be entirely sure that she didn't do this. She can't be entirely 100% certain, and that's part of the whole psychological suspense thriller aspect of this book, that we don't know. Even though we've got two narrators talking to us, we don't know whether Oriana is innocent or guilty, and it's only at the very end that we determine whether or not she's the guilty person or one of the other many suspects that I see throughout the book. For me, that was a large part of the fun of writing this kind of book. There were moments where I myself wasn't sure whether she was going to be guilty or whether she was not going to be guilty. And you're a psychological thriller writer as well. You understand that, sometimes you have to let the story take hold and the characters tell you whether they're going to be murdery or not. Is murdery a word? Well, if it isn't, it is now.
It's a very important word. Comes up a lot in my mind very often. That was one of the fun things about it, though. Those psychological elements, you did such a brilliant job of giving us Annie's perspective as the scientist behind this, looking at it and trying to peel back each layer of that onion. When she's dealing with Oriana, she's very honest with her in many ways. And she tells her things that maybe Oriana doesn't want to hear. And she knows that it could impede their progress, but she's willing to do it. And she's constantly seeing their relationship in the context of what is predominantly thought in her field of study. And it's almost like, well, I know this is what's generally accepted, but what if? What if Oriana is telling the truth about some of this stuff? And what if she doesn't remember? And what if some people were wrong about some of the things that she did?
Yeah, so Annie Ledet plays the role of detective, you could say. And in effect, she is us as the reader who doesn't know for sure whether Oriana did it or not. And neither does Annie at the beginning. All she's been told is that this young girl has been convicted and therefore notionally she is guilty. But she's an experienced therapist and she understands. She's been fighting the so-called memory wars where lots of different scientists who deal with issues of dissociative amnesia and people who suffer trauma and therefore it blanks out. So it could be that Oriana, is guilty because she's blanked out that day because of the trauma of committing murder. But at the same time, it could be something completely different and she's not guilty. And it's one of the other characters. And gradually, as the novel progresses, we see that Annie becomes more and more personally involved and she begins to cross lines that she shouldn't really cross as a therapist as she begins to investigate. And a large part of that, I guess, came from a book that I really loved and that was hugely successful called The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, who, by the way, read this book, The Girl in Soleil, and said some great things about it. But for me, that was a wonderful display of how you can use a therapist as a detective, but also to wrong foot the reader with twists and turns along the narrative.
One of the things that was so profound to me, and this is really emblematic of all good fiction, that it transcends and makes us think deeper about life and who we are, was the treatment around memory. The idea that we all want to be the hero in our own narrative. It was interesting to me the way that you made that such an everyday, approachable concept that sometimes our memories, we do gloss over them. And sometimes that's trauma induced, but sometimes I think it's just a function of who we are as human beings.
Absolutely. And, we see this played out time and again in the book, where as Oriana in the contemporary period goes back to this small town, and gradually as she rubs up against all of the people that she knew from 18 years ago, and one by one they begin to pop some of the balloons, some of the things that she's held in her head where she is completely innocent and has never done anything wrong, and gradually they begin to show her a side of herself that perhaps she's managed, not just because of the trauma, to hide and bury, but also because of that same mechanism that you're talking about, which is that we all want to believe the best about ourselves. So those are the twists and turns along the way that hopefully keep readers off balance, so they don't really know for sure where this is going to end. Is Oriana going to turn out to be this terribly evil person, or is she going to be a not very evil person who was just caught in a terrible circumstance, or is she completely innocent? We don't know.
We truly don't know until the very end. Was it harder to write this story? You mentioned your other series work. Was this story much harder for you being a psychological thriller? And if so, why?
Oh, yes, on so many levels it was harder because I'd never done something like this before. And also because I think when you do police procedurals over a series, you get to know the cast of characters and each subsequent book becomes easier to write. With this one, not just was it starting from scratch, but also as a Brit, I had to write America properly, get that voice down properly. I had to get the psychological thriller aspects right. And at one point, I'd written 100,000 words. And then I realized that I'd have to go back and change everything and go from third person narrative to first person and past tense to present tense, because They're much more immediate. They put us much more in the story. They're also much more par for the course for psychological and suspense thrillers, as you will know. And that was an incredibly painful exercise. I'd rather stab myself in the eye with a fork than have to do that again. But it was worth it, I think. I think that was what was needed for this kind of book.
It was absolutely worth it. Do you think there's future psychological thrillers on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've got quite a few book projects for the next 3 or 4 years, but my publisher were very happy with the book. They've asked me for another. I have to now spend the next year or so coming up with a pitch, and then I have to write it, and so it probably wouldn't be published for at least 2 to 3 years. But I loved it so much. I love the idea of doing a suspense thriller. I love the genre anyway, per se. But I also think that as authors, again, this, it's great to stretch ourselves. It's great to also dip into things that we love as readers. But I think more than anything else, it was just constructing these characters, which I've over decades watched in film and read in books. We haven't talked about my favorite character from The Girl in Saleh, which is actually Amos Whiteclerk, who's the current patriarch of the family, and he's an old guy who rules the family, the dynasty, with an iron fist. But he's also a construct of contradictions, because at some points his actions are completely opposite to the way we think he's going to act, especially when Oriana, who has basically been convicted of murdering Amos's son, and confronts him and says that I didn't kill your son, and he says yes you did. And then we see all sorts of things happening, which I won't give away. But as an individual, you can think Logan Ray in Succession, the TV series, or Kevin Costner in Yellowstone. He's a man who will do anything to preserve his family's wealth and power, and his tentacles run throughout not just the town but the entire county. And so I had enormous fun with Amos.
He was one of those characters, whether it's turns of phrase he uses, whether it's actions he engages in, you want to despise this guy for so many reasons. Yet, as you did with all these characters, they're so multidimensional that the same people that we want to see buried 6 feet under are the people that oddly we find ourselves cheerleading sometimes.
I think human beings in general are not one-dimensional. Even the most evil of evil people have communities who think they're amazing because they've shown a different side to those communities. And I think the best characters in fiction are the ones who do strike that balance between one facet and the other, because all of us are like that.
I completely agree. And I will say, just going back to a point you made earlier, I was kind of curious, is he going to pop in a Lyft or a lorry? No, none of that. He's stuck with all our American terminology all the way. Very impressive.
It's been 30 years of watching American films, reading American books, so I had a pretty good grasp. And even my editor was quite surprised, and she said, I usually have to correct loads of things when Brits try to write America, but you seem to have got most of these things correct. So yeah, I love American fiction. I just feel that as a nation, as a country, there are so many, it's so vast and so different. It's very much like writing India, which is so vast and has so many different stories to tell. And myself as a writer, yes, some people might argue, well, you've got no right to write America. You're a Brit and you've got Indian heritage and you've got nothing, no business writing small town America. To which my reply is, we write fiction. And the whole point of fiction is that you make things up and you make them think, but during the course of that, you try to do your research and you try to get into the skin of your characters and you do the best job that you can. Ultimately, and all I'm trying to do with The Girl in Saleh is deliver a read that is engrossing and interesting and has twists and turns. And hopefully at the end of it, readers put it down and think, you know what, that was money well spent, that was time well spent. And I'm not going to write to Mr. Khan and tell him never to write another damn word, because I quite like what he's done here.
I quite liked it as well. And I have to say, not only did you give us compelling characters, not only did you give us a wonderful plot, masterfully crafted in this genre, but at the same time, you gave us things about memory, things about power, privilege, just human dynamics in relationships, whether they're intimate relationships, familial relationships. There was just so much to unpack here. And wow.
Very kind of you to say.
One of the other things I wanted to ask about really quick, because you did mention being a Brit. One of my favorite franchises of all time comes from Ian Fleming. And I did want to ask you about a very, very special project you have coming up, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Well, thank you for asking. Yes. And again, I grew up in Britain, so of course I'm a Bond fan. And so I have been asked by the Fleming estate, Ian Fleming's family and his estate, to write a series where Q is the central protagonist, not James Bond. So it's a series of traditional mysteries, not spy thrillers like Bond. So Q's not going to be wandering around with a rocket launcher or diving off trains. What happens is that Q, in this first book, which is called Quantum of Menace, is kicked out of MI6, Britain's secret intelligence agency, and he's licking his wounds, and then he decides to go back to his very small hometown of a few thousand people near London. And it's the place where he grew up, but he's been estranged from that town and his family there, his father. And he's gone back because he is trying to solve the mysterious death of his childhood friend, Peter Napier, who is a quantum computer scientist, hence the title Quantum of Menace. And that book will be published in the UK this October. I'm hugely looking forward to it. I've had a huge amount of fun writing it. I don't know when it's going to be published in America, but of course it will be at some point. And I hope readers like my version of Q. He's neither Desmond Llewellyn, he's neither Ben Whishaw. He's somewhere in the middle, a 50-year-old man who's a very serious scientist who takes himself seriously, but who has a very dry sense of humor, which appears in the book as well. And of course, James Bond does make an appearance. How could he not?
Oh my goodness. Okay. I do not know what I'm going to do between now and publication date in the US. I may have to hop on a plane, get over, buy a copy because I won't be able to wait. This sounds so very good. And based on what I read in The Girl in Cell A, I can't wait to read more of your work.
Oh, that's really lovely of you to say.
Last question, maybe the biggest question of all. What do you do for fun when you are not spinning these amazing yarns?
Well, that great American sport, cricket.
Oh yeah, huge over here.
Well, you've got the easier version, baseball, right? So cricket is it's basically. I mean, somebody said the way to look at cricket is that this is a game that can go on for 5 days, and still nothing happens, which is pretty good for me as a writer because I can take my laptop. And then if nothing's going on, I can just sit on the sidelines and do some writing. So that's my chosen activity when I'm not writing.
Do you observe or play? Are you on the field more or in the stands more often?
I play, but like baseball, you can go in. So we call them batters. You call them pitch. No, you call them batters as well, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you get out as a batter, then you have to go and sit on the sidelines. Now, in baseball, if you get out, you get angry and you fling your bat and you shout at people, etc. But in cricket, you're not allowed to do that because it's supposed to be a gentle person sport. And so we sit and we just do other things. We have tea and we try to not shout at our colleagues.
Sounds like an absolutely wonderful way to compete without any element of blood sport to it.
Yeah, you could say that. You could say that.
And where is the best place for readers to find you and find out what's coming next?
VaseemKhan.com. So my website has all the information. I'm also on social media, which you can find me there easily as well.
Well, thank you again. Thank you for such a wonderful read. I absolutely loved it. As I said, propulsive plot, absolutely amazing characters, and oh my goodness, what a twist in the end.
You're too kind. You're too kind, Mary. Thank you.
Again, The Girl in Cell A. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Marie.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.